I mentioned before you joined us that I've now watched Epstein Filthy Rich twice on Netflix, and my major takeaways from it, aside from the monstrous injustice done to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and their rich and famous friends, was that there was more to this story than that. This was an operation that was going on. That rich and powerful people were being attracted to the sordid goings-on in Epstein's multiple residences precisely to entrap them so that political or other forms of blackmail could then be deployed. What's your take on that, Conchita? You're an expert on the case.
Well, first of all, George, thank you very much for having me on your show. As you know, I have been an advocate on behalf of victims of human trafficking since 2006. And it was because of my investigations of other cases that I stumbled into the Jeffrey Epstein case in 2009. And the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were acquaintances for more than 20 years. I know very much about this case, not only from my investigation, but also from my relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell and with Jeffrey Epstein. That said, to answer first your question, the Netflix documentary, in my view, I did not participate. I willingly did not participate. And the reason is I had certain trepidation concerning that documentary. Secondly, I found that there were many inaccuracies and gaps and misinformation. I can name you some examples, but you are absolutely correct in that the travesty of justice and the level, the peddling of influence at the highest levels of government continue to be terrifying. For me, it was the Jeffrey Epstein case, after having investigated many, many human trafficking cases, particularly child sex trafficking cases. It was the Jeffrey Epstein case that for me became, and the reason that I've invested 10 years of my life following this particular case, because I knew that this case contained all the elements necessary for our governments, and I say that in plural, to not only create new laws, but enforce existing laws. For example, in the United States, we have, since the year 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, that's TVPA. And TVPA was signed under President Bill Clinton, and it was enacted in the state of Florida, where Jeffrey Epstein was first arrested in the year 2000. So why didn't the government actually enforce TVPA? Well, as you, in your country, you have several laws as well, not the TVPA, but similar laws. Those laws rarely are enforced. And so for me, the driving force behind this case, and the reason for me this is the most important case, is because it brings together elements of injustice, elements of abuse of power, elements of influence peddling, of cronism, even, in fact, this issue, particularly in the United States, of campaign finance reform. So for me, this is the critical case. It not only spans 3 continents, it spans well over a decade, multiple jurisdictions, and it includes a prince, it includes a former president of the United States, a former prime minister of Israel, and other opinion leaders that have for so many years been influential in the policy-making arena. So it is very important that we pay attention to the Epstein case for all the right reasons. And those reasons begin and end with the rights of children and the rights of victims. That is very important, George. And to me, that is why I wrote Trafficking. I was the first one to publish a book in 2016, April 2016, after 27 publishers turned me down. And I was the first one to break the story wide open in a 6-part series in the Daily Beast between the years 2010 and 2015. The former prosecutor, Alex Acosta, handed me that letter that recently, I think it was 2017 or 18, when the Miami Herald published their version of the Epstein story, all of a sudden found the letter. Well, that letter has been online since Alex Acosta, the former labor secretary, forced to resign in 2019. That letter has been online since March of 2011. And in one of my most recent conversations with Professor Alan Dershowitz, after he and I, there was a silence between us for 9 years because of the Daily Beast series, he said to me, the negotiations for the non-prosecution agreement were made at the federal level, meaning they were made at the Department of Justice by 3 individuals, and the power was removed from Alex Acosta immediately because it was such a high-profile case. And so the individuals who actually negotiated the non-prosecution agreement were the Attorney General of the United States in 2007.
Who was that?
Well, it began with Alberto Gonzalez, the first Hispanic Attorney General in the United States. He, as you know, left the administration, President George W. Bush's administration, September of 2007. And Michael Mukasey then became the Attorney General following Mr. Gonzalez's leave. The head of the criminal division at the time was Miss Alice S. Fisher, and then the Deputy Attorney General, who at the time was Mr. Mark Phillip. I have spoken to Mr. Gonzalez. I spoke briefly to Ms. Fisher, and I have not been able to speak to Mr. Phillip, Mark Phillip. So all this, of course, will be in my upcoming book, which is a sequel to Trafficking. Perhaps the public and hopefully the opinion leaders who will read my book will perhaps better understand why this case is so important.
Tell me this, Conchita. On the face of it, Jeffrey Epstein, yes, certainly at that time, was not a well-known person. He was an ill-educated, undereducated huckster, good at using other people's money, particularly the underwear mogul Wexner's money, the Victoria's Secret's man. Why would all these mighty figures at the federal level in the U.S. government be negotiating a non-prosecution deal in the Jeffrey Epstein case? Can you think of a reason?
That is such an excellent and critical question, George. I believe that the short answer is money. He was paying a dream team of attorneys. I mean, just look at the attorneys that he had on pay, beginning with Professor Dershowitz, who's an appellate attorney. Okay, so he was not. He cannot take on a case from the beginning. He takes on the case on appeal. But you had, of course, George Lefcourt. You had Martin Weinberg, Jack Goldberg. You had Kenneth Starr, Jay Lefkowitz. It was, in fact, Kenneth Starr, as you remember, the Solicitor General during President Bill Clinton's
impeachment
with, because of the Lewinsky, because of the Clinton-Lewinsky affair. So Kenneth Starr and Jay Lefkowitz negotiated Epstein's non-prosecution agreement. But at the state level, when the case first goes to the state attorney's office, it was in fact Barry Kirshner who wanted Epstein's case to go away immediately. And he ordered a misdemeanor. And it was because of Barry Kirshner's misdemeanor that the case goes to the feds. Otherwise, had Barry Kirshner decided that Epstein should go to jail, as he should have, the feds would not have gotten involved.
Well, of course, if he'd gone to jail, then a lot of poor girls, children, we've got to be clear about this, many of the young girls that were featured in the documentary were 13 and 14 years old when Maxwell and Epstein began sexually abusing them. That means raping them. Rape is because a child cannot consent to sexual activity with an adult. So they were raping these children. And so those responsible for not putting him to prison as he should and would have gone have now a heavy responsibility on their shoulders for all the other children that were subsequently raped and abused by this pair. And now, Conchita, I know Ghislaine Maxwell. I played a role in the bringing down of her father, the late Robert Maxwell. But I don't know Epstein. You said you had some knowledge, personal knowledge of both of them. Can you give us a picture of what that grotesque duo were like?
Yes, I shall, but let me just begin with by just adding a comment to your last statement, which is very important. You know, the fact that not only the state attorney has blood on his hands today, I also believe that, unfortunately, because I come from, you know, my family history is very much entwined with a media family in the United States. And so I have deep respect and love and admiration for most of the investigative journalists today and in the past. But I must say that the media did not help. When I took this case to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, I could go, the Miami Herald, in fact, I took it, I brought them the case, I brought them the files. No one wanted to pay attention to me or to this case. And the only woman who had the courage to take a look at the case, to take a look at the files and tell me we're going forward was Tina Brown, who was the then editor of the Daily Beast. So I wanted to add that because that's very, very important. If it weren't for Tina, perhaps we wouldn't even be where we are today. And I want to publicly thank her. Now, back to your question. I met Ghislaine and Jeffrey more or less at the same time in the early 90s when I met Jeffrey Epstein first. And he at the time was not dating Ghislaine Maxwell. And I met Ghislaine a few years later through a mutual friend. I met both of them through mutual acquaintances and a mutual friend. And I must say that at the very beginning, of course, you know, I didn't know Epstein, so the only thing I knew at the very beginning was that here was a man, when he came to my home, which was the first time we met, he played the piano. I had a piano, and he played beautifully, and he was charming, I must say, and, you know, a man of many interests, and he seemed nice enough, curious enough, so I thought he was an intelligent man, and we ended up seeing each other at different events, etc. And then I met Ghislaine Maxwell a few years later, and she still was not dating him at the time, and and she too was quite charming, far more educated than Jeffrey Epstein, and a woman who seemed, to have the pulse on things. Also highly curious, vivacious, multilingual. Highly educated, and so Ghislaine and I became friendly. Pretty much, she knew of my former husband's family, and of course I knew of her family, and so it became an acquaintanceship, and we would see each other at events and etc. So when I found out that they were dating, and I was quite surprised. I didn't think that Epstein. I didn't think Ghislaine Maxwell would like someone like Epstein. It didn't occur to me that they would be a couple. And then, of course, you realize that Ghislaine must have suffered a great deal after her father passed. And I think Jeffrey, to her, was more of a savior, a protector, someone who took over the role of father. And I do believe, because she did tell me at one point that she was in love with him and wanted to marry him. And I believed her. There was no reason not to. And the times that I did see them together, I certainly didn't see them with underage girls. Otherwise, I would have, screamed loud and clear way before 2009. So I never saw them. When I went to his home in Palm Beach, I never saw anything untoward. It was shocking. It was shocking to find out later. But one thing, and I wanted to mention this one red flag, I was at the Clinton Global Initiative in 2007, and I was speaking to a former president of Latin America, and Ghislaine came from the back, and she picked me up as I was speaking to the president, and I found that so shocking and just so improper, given the venue where we were, and obviously I was speaking to someone who was a head of state. And then I realized when he looked at me in a certain way that, oh my goodness, there's something here that I don't quite understand. And he asked me, the former president said to me, how do you know Ghislaine Maxwell? But the way he asked me, being a Latin man, I know, the nuances are there. And so I picked up on the nuance, and I realized, oh, there's something here that's unusual. And so that was 2007. I saw Ghislaine again, I think one more time in 2009, and then that was it. I was off and running on this investigation, and of course, the rest is history. I don't need to tell you.
Where do you think she might be now, and why is no one looking for her?
What a great question. Another great question. I believe she is in an unextraditable country. As you know, she is both a British and a French citizen. She is not an American citizen. So there aren't any criminal cases against her. I'm sure you know this. And so the fact that there are only civil cases points to a rather interesting phenomena, in that because, according to my conversation again with Professor Dershowitz, the statute of limitations is such that I don't think Ghislaine Maxwell can be criminally charged. She has not been criminally charged so far. All of the cases against Ghislaine Maxwell are civil cases, which means that the plaintiffs are asking for compensation, that is financial compensation. I don't know if there will be a criminal case filed against her, at which point I would assume that the Department of Justice would force an extradition from wherever she is. She's certainly not going to come near the United States.
Well, she's not in Britain. She's not in America, it would appear. Might she be in Israel?
Well, I don't know if Israel would be the right venue for her. I would think more somewhere in the Middle East. That is, there are only 9 countries in the world where the United States cannot extradite. But isn't it interesting, George, that, as you might have heard, the Attorney General William Barr said the other day publicly on a television show that he is looking to interview Prince Andrew simply for, quote, evidence. That means that no criminal charges pending, just simply the Attorney General and the Department of Justice in the United States want to find out what Prince Andrew knows and what, quote, evidence he can provide. Now, if Prince Andrew, who was the only one who pointed fingers at Ghislaine Maxwell, beside the plaintiffs, of course, beside the victims, who in their complaints are all pointing fingers at Ghislaine Maxwell, why, in fact, is the Department of Justice, why is the Home Office in the UK not bringing Ghislaine in? More importantly, she is a citizen of your country. She is not a citizen of our country, and there are no criminal charges against her. The other situation, and I think this is an important one, is that Virginia Roberts Giuffre, the young lady, the survivor, and the young lady who claimed that she was sexually abused by Prince Andrew, she claims she was 17 years old in the UK, which would make her of age, meaning she was age of consent in the UK, because 17 is age of consent, so it is not a crime in the UK.
But if she was in the UK, she'd been trafficked to the UK from a country where 17 is not of age.
Hold on, let me get to that. Yes, exactly. That's my point. That is my point. So my point is, she claims that in the UK she was 17, and the first time that she was sexually abused by Prince Andrew in London, she was 17. Well, in London, that would make her of age. However, in the US, because she came from Florida, she was not age of consent. In Florida, age of consent is 18. And then she claims that she also was sexually abused by Prince Andrew in New York and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Well, either of those, New York is 18, and correct me if I'm wrong, U.S. Virgin Islands is also 18.
It is. Last question, because we're running out of time, Conchita. The world is puzzled that a prisoner so important as Jeffrey Epstein, facing what would have been the trial of the 21st century so far, one which would have drawn in the names of all these powerful people that we've been talking about, was able to commit suicide and thus obviate any possibility of embarrassing court proceedings. Do you believe that he committed suicide?
I do not believe he committed suicide. 1 week following his arrest on July 9th, 2019, I was speaking to an active federal agent, that is, an active FBI agent. And the agent said to me on the telephone, Conchita, he will not make it to trial. There are towels on the inside. I quote. That's all I have to say.
Well, it's powerful enough, and sometimes brevity is the soul and all of that. A very, very powerful piece of testimony that. Conchita Sarnoff, the best of luck with your new book and for all the work that you have done on this. All decent people in the world, thank you.